Today, I'm joined by Tobias Böcker, formerly of Mojo. He's seen the good, the bad, and the we almost made it sides of MedTech innovation. We'll talk about why some great ideas die too soon, how ambition can blindfold us, and what not to do if you want to survive the valley. Tobias, could you please tell us a bit more about yourself and what you were working on at Mojo?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kata, and it's a pleasure to be here. A bit about myself. I grew up in Germany. I went to university in Germany, to business school, and my first job was actually in consulting, and that was back in 2009. And it was all the hype to be in consulting or investment banking and these kind of things. So I went for that route, and I lasted 9 months because I could not deal with the hierarchy and I found it incredibly boring overall. So I started my first company. And back then I had absolutely no clue what I was doing, but I was kind of hooked on the entrepreneurial path. My first business was in the e-commerce space, so very much removed from anything MedTech related, but it kind of gave me the first glimpse into this world and what it means to actually build something. And fast forward, I managed to actually sell that company and then move to France, to Lyon, for my MBA. During that MBA, I met two of my co-founders for my latest company, which is Mojo, as you said in the introduction. And we embarked on a 7-year-long journey in which I did many things, but primarily I was more outward focused. So for a while it was raising funds. Then for a while it was navigating the kind of clinical landscape and signing partnerships with clinics for co-development and testing, among others, with the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And later it moved more to the commercial side, especially when we pivoted from B2B to B2C, where I then was in charge of, basically sales, marketing, partnerships, and all these kind of things. And so typical for a founder in a startup, you wear many hats and they change all the time.
Yeah, that's right. If you're working in a startup, you're kind of the whole team on your own.
Exactly.
When I invited you to this episode, I read your LinkedIn post about the Valley of Death, and you've written that the Valley of Death is where innovation meets funding friction. How did you first encounter this valley?
So we were actually lucky enough to not really encounter the valley, because when we started the company in 2017-18, we were able to get funds quite quickly. First, there was some smaller checks from grants, some also associated with Horizon 2020, but then also private investors who just believed that what we were working on was meaningful and had a lot of potential. And so we managed to go to Shenzhen in China, build a prototype, and just really move the company along for a long time without commercial traction, but still able to raise funds. I think in 2018, we raised our first $1 million from venture capital. And so the valley of death that a lot of companies experience is often because they have a great idea. They might have a great product. It might even be validated, but they don't really know how to monetize it. They haven't figured out their go-to-market, which is what prohibits them from raising funds. We kind of managed to raise funds, even though we hadn't figured out our go-to-market. And I think that was maybe because we had a stellar team, we had a great prototype, and maybe we were just in a time frame where funding for these kind of ideas was a bit more loose. I think in today's world, it has changed a lot, and I don't think this would ever happen again, what we experienced.
Are you saying that you managed to bridge most of the Valley of Death with PowerPoint slides for the investors?
Not only PowerPoint slides, because they, of course, did their due diligence. And I vividly recall one VC from Finland who brought in a specific person to take a close look at our company. And that person said, well, they're legit. What they're doing makes a lot of sense. I believe in it, and I give you the advice to invest into the company. which they did. So it was definitely more than PowerPoint slides. However, I think we kind of faced the valley of death way later. We faced it 4 years later, 3-4 years later. And the reason was because at that point, we had a well-functioning product. We had it CE certified. We had it clinically validated. So we had our ducks in a row. It was great. So all the things that a lot of startups struggle with, we already managed to accomplish. And when it came to our go-to-market, we faced the first challenges, which centered around how needed is this product really. And that was also one of the biggest lessons. Like I think we very much fell in love with the idea, and we saw there is need in clinics, or at least we thought there was need in clinics, because from the outside perspective, looking at how they do manual sperm analysis, which comes with a lot of risk for errors because of subjective morphology scoring or sperm counting inaccuracies, etc., etc. We thought it would make a lot of sense to automate that. But the clinics didn't think so.
Why?
Because number one, no clinic would like to admit that the way they have been doing something for decades was maybe not the best way. And second, because it was incredibly cheap for them to do it the way they were doing it. So a manual sperm analysis in an IVF clinic takes about, let's say, 3 to 5 minutes. And if you look at, what's the average wage of a clinical embryologist, it's like 25 pounds, which means 5 minutes cost like 2 pounds, which is incredibly difficult to compete with at such a low cost. Now, but if we look at an andrology lab, like the one we validated our product with at the Karolinska Institute, they take 30 to 45 minutes to analyze a sperm sample. So they really go in depth and make sure they have the full picture on this specific sample, which in fertility clinics is not necessarily what they focus on. And thus, even though automation seemed like the way to go, we just faced a lot of challenges getting it adopted in the clinics. And on top of that, COVID came.
And was that when you pivoted to B2C from B2B?
Correct. Because suddenly when COVID came, we were focused on the UK. And so clinics were seeing a drop in patient throughput of 80, 90%. And we were venture capital funded, right? We had to find a way to return the money to our investors and even multiply it. So we couldn't just sit there and wait until COVID was over. And that when I vividly remember this message my co-founder sent on Teams, our communication tool of choice back then, because we were in MedTech, right? We had to go with Microsoft.
Yes, because Microsoft is used in most of the healthcare systems, right?
Exactly. And he said, we need to pivot to D2C. That's the opportunity that's in front of us right now, because the NHS already has long waiting times, or fertility clinics in general, which means that there's already a lot of people waiting for fertility treatment. And the pandemic amplified that. There was even more people who were sitting at home trying to conceive, desperately waiting for some answers, some treatment, and they couldn't get it. So this is where we saw the opportunity, and we opened a lab in London. We equipped it with our own technology. And just for the record, what that technology was. So it was a fully automated AI-driven microscope to analyze sperm samples. You couldn't look through it. It was a camera system that recorded several videos of the sperm sample. And then we had different algorithms analyzing these sperm samples and providing numbers that then the professional could interpret. So we basically could just hire one professional and have 5-10 microscopes in our lab. And at the same time, we launched a direct-to-consumer brand, which basically enabled men to test their fertility from home. And the way that would work would be that men, or actually in many cases also women, would order sperm collection kits on our website. We would ship it out to them. They would produce a sample at home, ship it back to us. We analyze it, provide the results, and offer further consultation. And basically, over the span of 18 to 24 months, we became the market leader in the UK for at-home sperm analysis. And I think at one point, we were even the largest processor of sperm samples in the UK, because we were the only one really focused on analyzing dozens of samples a day, every single day.
And by then, this technology was already validated, right? And CE marked.
Correct. We had also different publications. We had presented at different conferences like ESHRE, which is the biggest conference in Europe for reproductive health.
Mm-hmm. So you by this time you already had all your ducks in a row, really. But the only thing that you hit a wall with was the public healthcare systems procurement.
Absolutely. And I think that is something we absolutely underestimated. And actually, to be honest, in the UK, we focused on private clinics because we knew that focusing on the public healthcare system, or namely the NHS, that's a whole different ballgame. And we said, let's start with the private clinics. And when we see traction here and when we have use cases, we can focus on the NHS. But as I said earlier, we already faced some challenges with the private clinics because, spending £2 on a sperm analysis is incredibly cheap, and you can't really make it much cheaper with technology.
Mm-hmm. And how does it fit into the reimbursement system? If you're making it faster, more automated, then technically the labs could analyze more samples in the same time.
They could, but they don't necessarily need to, because at least not fertility clinics, because fertility clinics can only process a certain number of patients at a given time. So they would often have men come in on a specific day or maybe 2 days in a week. They all provide the sample one after the other, and then an embryologist, for example, analyzes these samples. The story is a little bit different if we look at sperm banks, for example, and there definitely was a use case with sperm banks because they process, definitely a lot of samples. Mm-hmm. And the challenge there was the sperm banks that we spoke with had already deployed other technologies. So we were not the first ones automating sperm analysis. There were so-called Kata systems, computer-assisted sperm analysis, which has its faults, but because these sperm banks were desperately trying to automate things, they just bought what was on the market, and they weren't ready to invest in new technology. And just for context, our product was called Mojo ISA, so a little bit similar to Kata, but ISA stood for AI-assisted sperm analysis.
Mm-hmm. So basically, the first mover on this market was in a better position because they covered the whole territory, and then you had no space to break into.
Well, not quite. The first Kata systems came out, I think, in the end of the 1980s. However, what they did is they kind of burned the community a bit, because the promise in the beginning was high and people would have loved the idea to automate things, but they felt that these devices were not as accurate and reliable as they hoped to be. So I would say even today, in more than 90% of fertility clinics, sperm samples are being analyzed manually. And that's why I also tell everyone who experiences fertility issues to maybe do a privately paid semen analysis with an andrology lab to really rule out that there are any issues on the male side. Because, as said earlier, the analysis being done in the fertility clinics for male fertility is not really deep.
So technically your machine was working a bit better than the current practice, but it cost too much for the clinic. It wasn't financially viable for them to invest into your lab equipment.
Exactly.
When you pivoted to B2C during COVID, that really worked out for you if you grew so big that you were the largest sperm analysis provider in the UK. I would imagine that the VC, your investors, especially the VC, was really happy with your traction. You were generating the revenue that they required you to generate, right?
In the early days, yes. The challenge with growth is that once you grow, you always expect it to grow more. And so from launching the direct-to-consumer brand, throughout the next 2 years, I would say growth was great. We also signed several significant partnerships, for example, with Superdrug in the UK. So all that really helped keep the growth engine going.
Mm-hmm.
However, at one point we hit a plateau, and we
Mm-hmm.
couldn't really get beyond it. And I believe that the biggest challenge was that marketing a taboo topic to people who don't want to talk or even think about it is just really, really difficult. I think we've seen a lot of brands in the female sexual health space and fertility space that have done quite well for themselves, starting with period trackers, all the way to at-home hormone testing, blood testing, these kind of things. And I believe there is just more communication and exchange among women than there is among men. I think there's still a big hurdle for a man to talk, even with a best friend, about the idea that they might not be as fertile as they thought they were. So I believe what in the end led to us not being able to grow the company to the kind of ambitions we had was that we couldn't crack the marketing nut. Like getting people off Google was really easy because people were specifically searching for sperm analysis near me or at-home sperm analysis or these kind of things. So there was a very high purchase intent already. So acquiring these customers was not difficult. However, search volume is limited, right? So at one point you need to move further up the funnel and you need to start thinking about maybe having ads on Facebook or Instagram or wherever. And that's where it became really difficult. That's where it became difficult, and we could not figure that out at scale with a return on ad spend that kind of kept us having a viable business.
So it's an interesting learning also that when you're catering for a problem where the public awareness is a bit limited or people are not comfortable talking about it, then it's really hard to reach an untapped customer base. There's resistance towards working on the problem at home, that you have a problem with your sperm, and as a man it might affect how you feel about your identity.
Absolutely. I always say that as a man, when you orgasm, something comes out, so you think everything is fine. But most people, for example, don't know that semen and sperm are two different things. And even someone who had a vasectomy, there is still semen coming out, right? And it still looks like, okay, there's an ejaculate, like he's fertile, which he is not. In that case, it's desired that he's not fertile, of course. But as men, we never learn to think about our reproductive health. And I think that's another big difference to women. I'm German, and I know that in Germany, a girl, in that case, a teenager at the age of like 14, would have her first appointment with a gynecologist. But a man would maybe see, in that case, maybe a urologist by the age of 45 or 50 for a prostate exam. That's like, if there's nothing urgent before that requires a visit to the urologist. So we never have a reason to think about our reproductive health. And that reflects in, if you want to sell something to men and 1 in 6, for example, has this issue, but these people don't know they have the issue. And when they realize they have the issue, maybe because the female partner did some checkups and everything is fine, and then it's like kind of, well, maybe it's the man's fault. So when that pressure suddenly arises, then this becomes a highly emotional topic. And so customer support for our product was always a very interesting experience, because we would get a lot of messages from desperate people, from angry people, etc. So it required a lot of, how to say, in German we have this word Fingerspitzengefühl, and I have no idea how it translates to English.
I don't know.
But you needed to be like highly emotionally intelligent to answer to these people and guide them along the journey. We definitely picked an incredibly hard space to operate in. First starting with hardware and software for that matter, then moving into direct to consumer, catering towards an audience that might not even know they have a problem. And once they realize they have a problem, they become highly emotional about it.
So if you were writing a hitchhiker's guide to failure prevention, what are the top mistakes you wish someone had warned you about? Apart from misreading the market, of course, because you said that 90% of the clinics still do it manually, the sperm analysis. And maybe it's not because they're resistant to innovation, but it's just that way. It's just good enough for them to continue. And economically, that's the viable solution. But when you talk about going B2C and trying to tap into this market that is super sensitive emotionally, it just shows that it's not enough to market the product, but you also need to market the mindset around it.
Absolutely. To come back to the question, how can you read it again? The Reverse Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yeah, if you were writing the Hitchhiker's Guide to Failure Prevention, what are the top mistakes you wish someone had warned you about?
I think the number one mistake, and it's an obvious one, don't fall in love with your idea. Just because you think this product should exist doesn't mean that anyone else thinks this product exists. And this can be difficult because you find people who will also have your opinion. Like when we talked with, for example, Lars Björndal at the Karolinska Institute, the reason why he agreed to work with us was because he felt this was an amazing product. As an andrologist, he can say that. Mm-hmm. But then entering the reality of a fertility clinic, they just didn't feel the same way. And we ignored that for a long time. And we're like, we're just talking to the wrong clinic. Let's talk to another one and another one. Then there's always these little signals where you think it's going in the right direction. Like someone wants to try it out, right? Someone wants to use it to publish a paper and these kind of things. So it is incredibly hard to differentiate, noise from signals.
So you have the selection bias. You're going into direction that says, yes, your product is wonderful, but really forget to look at the reason why the others reject it. And then the others become the majority rejecting it.
Exactly. And I think another thing to really look into early is who's going to pay for it and why would they pay for it? And this is the same for the private and the public sector. The private sectors care a lot about efficiency. Many fertility clinics are owned by private equity groups. Mm-hmm. So there it just needs to make sense financially. And we can't compete with £2 for a sperm analysis. Mm-hmm. And in the public sector, the purchasing cycles are just so much longer. And there's so many hurdles in the way. And I think many MedTech companies are very product focused because people are passionate about a product. Maybe they have an engineering background. They love tinkering. But the big questions that are monumental for the success of the company is, of course, regulatory approval. Mm-hmm. But it's also what's the go-to-market? Who's going to pay for it?
Mm-hmm. Given these long purchasing timelines, how do VCs approach this problem in MedTech? Is it a good idea to invest as a VC into a MedTech product?
Well, I absolutely think that it is a good idea to invest in MedTech products because what I love about medical technologies is that they really solve big problems. And they're doing something, it sounds cheesy, but they're doing something for humanity, right? They're trying for people to have a better experience with the healthcare system. I would pick that anytime over the next Snapchat. VCs usually have fund life cycles of about 5 to 7 years, which means if they invest in a company, they ideally would like to exit with a lot more money than they invested in the first place after 5 to 7 years. Mm-hmm. In MedTech, that can be challenging. And it's not even the fault of or not necessarily the fault of the startup. Just if we look at how long it takes to get a notified body for CE approval, especially with a small company that might not have as many resources as a bigger one, there are long waiting times, mm-hmm. and that's kind of out of a startup's control. Same with the FDA. I have friends that have worked now, I think, close to 2 years on the FDA approval. They got rejected several times, and finally they got accepted. Mm-hmm. That was basically out of their control. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing, though. They are VC funded, And now the VC is incredibly excited about this opportunity because, yeah, okay, they have FDA approval and the whole market opens up suddenly. So here's the thing. I believe MedTech is still interesting for VCs or investors in general because regulation can also create a defense mechanism or a moat, because not everybody can pass this regulation. Once you pass it, you have an inherent advantage over other companies trying to accomplish the same.
Right.
It might, however, make sense if for anyone looking for funding in MedTech to look at investors that are maybe a little bit more relaxed on the fund return cycles. That could be VCs who specifically have longer timeframes. That could also be family offices who invest their own money. They don't invest anyone else's money, which means they don't need to return that money to anyone. And of course, it can also be public funding.
Yes. And would you say that it's a good strategy, funding-wise, to go for non-VC funding, mostly soft funding, and maybe angel and family offices? And then when you reach that point that you have about 5 to 7 years to start generating revenue and returns, then get the VC investment?
VCs will, in today's world, I believe, only invest if the go-to-market is crystal clear.
But that's not the case with you, was it?
No, it wasn't the case with us, and that was 7 years ago. It was a different world.
Okay.
So to answer your question, I think in the early days, yeah, get money where you can get it from. Get it from friends and family if you have the luxury that your friends and family have money to spare. Get it from public funding. But here's the thing also, writing these applications takes a certain know-how, and it also takes time.
Yes.
So it's kind of also distracting from the main business. Every fundraising is distracting from the main business. Ideally, I know one case where the founders spoke to a potential client, and the client said, I love this product. Here is €1 million, build the product. That was basically pre-revenue. And that was amazing because the founders actually managed to keep their equity for decades. They didn't need to sell. And then it turned into a very successful company. And eventually a large private equity fund knocked on the door, bought the majority of the company. The founders are very, very wealthy right now. And all that because in the early days, they didn't need to raise any funding. So here's also a thing that I would like to tell entrepreneurs. The equity is your most valuable asset. In the early days, that's hard to see. But if you imagine that company being a large company, then suddenly that equity is worth a lot. And for reference, in my case with Mojo, in the beginning, I had something like 25% of the company. At the end, when we had to close down the company, I had 5%. So even if the company became very successful, my returns would have been still, of course, life-changing, but not like, okay, let me buy a yacht and spend the rest of my life in Saint-Tropez kind of.
Did you manage to secure public funding with Mojo?
We did. We got some minor funds, around 30,000 euros in France, and that is because the company was incorporated in France. That was under the BPI, that's the largest French public investment bank, I believe. That's how it's called. And then later we managed to get 100,000 euros under the data pitch initiative from Horizon 2020, and that was UK based. And because in our case, it was all about data, we managed to get into that program, which was a lifesaver back then. I think without it, we would have run out of money. And that basically enabled us to reach a few milestones that then made our company attractive enough for VCs to come in about 12 months later.
That's a very interesting journey you've been through with Mojo. How did you cope when you ended up closing down the company?
It was hard. It was really hard. I think I had this gut feeling for a long time, not for a long time, but maybe for 1.5 years, that this is not going in the direction I wanted to go. There were also some disputes with investors. because no one was happy with how the company in the end was developing. We had all these big hopes about the direct-to-consumer play, which in the beginning was going very well, but then we hit that plateau. And investors had already put quite a lot of money into the company. So putting more and more money was not really on the table. And I don't blame them. I totally understand it. But obviously, as founders, we were doing this for a long time. We were running low on energy. And I just had the feeling that it's not going in the right direction. But at the same time, it was very hard to walk away. I'm a very loyal person. So I didn't want to let my co-founders down. I didn't want to let the company down. And when the signs in the end were clear that we had to close down, which was in Q2 2025, then I thought, okay, that's just another chapter of my life closed, and let's see what's next. So I actually thought it would be not difficult to move on. But then over summer, I realized, okay, there is actually something much deeper here. Things I need to process. There's grief, definitely. I had invested so many years of my life into this. I had so many high hopes for this company. And in the end, it didn't amount to much, except for all the experience that I have gained. And I like to compare it to a breakup. If you are in a 7-year relationship, you're probably going to be sad if the relationship is over, assuming it was a non-abusive relationship, hopefully. But you're going to mourn that relationship. And it was a similar process for me. And the journey of what's coming next, I'm still on that journey. And I'm trying out different things. But what I observe is that this identity that I have formed about myself over the past 7 years, or 8 years now almost, that identity needed to go. And now I'm in the process of finding my new identity, which is incredibly exciting and sometimes also incredibly scary.
Yeah, it's very difficult to find the way back to yourself, especially if you identify so much with the role you fulfilled during the past 7 years in the company.
Exactly.
To close down this discussion, what is your one piece of advice to MedTech founders who are staring at the valley of death?
It's really hard to put this into one piece of advice because there is just more than one thing to focus on. And so I guess then I need to make it a bit more abstract. And in that case, I would say constantly question everything. Even if you think you have found the path, it's probably not the path. So don't become complacent. Don't become too excited. Constantly challenge your own assumptions. And that is hard. And I think only few people actually enjoy that process. But it is what dramatically will increase your chances of survival and your chances of building a successful company.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. And it's super difficult to challenge your own beliefs. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. We've had a lot of interesting learnings from you. So if people would like to connect with you, how can they reach out to you?
The best way would be on LinkedIn. And people can find me under my full name, which is Tobias Böcker, and Böcker is written Boecker.
Thank you.
Amazing, Kata. Thanks a lot for organizing this.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Walk the Valley. Tobias's story is a powerful reminder that building a great product isn't enough. Even with clinical validation, CE certification, and a strong team, success ultimately depends on whether the market truly needs and is willing to pay for what you've built. Some of the key lessons: don't fall in love with your idea. Make sure you understand who will actually pay for your product and why. And remember that navigating the go-to-market is at least as hard as building the technology itself, if not harder. The Valley of Death isn't just about running out of funding. It's about the moment when innovation meets reality. If you found this conversation useful, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us continue sharing honest stories from people navigating healthcare innovation. You can listen to Walk the Valley on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep walking the valley.